Deputy State Security Minister Zizi says communities are being used by instigators with political agendas and ulterior motives to try and destabilize South Africa. This as State Security Minister Ayanda Dlodlo said that the State Security Agency itself is investigating claims of former spies instigating violence in provinces like KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. For more on this, let's bring in former Safety and Security Minister Dr. Mufamadi, who led a panel review investigation, you remember, of the State Security Agency, and that was back in 2018. Dr. Mufamadi, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's lovely to have you with us here on the AM Report. There's a feeling that the state security and the intelligence of the country have been hollowed out because of being politicized and because of corruption, and that's why we've had, call it, a less than efficient response to the unrest. What's your take on that perception?
Yeah, well, maybe let's leave perceptions aside for a moment and talk to the reality that we see unfolding on the ground. There were warning signs in evidence for quite some time, particularly with the build-up of tension in KwaZulu-Natal around Nkandla, where there was a lot of irresponsible talk about shutdown, which is intended to inoculate former President Zuma from accounting for the things that happened during his term of office. Now, that was enough of an early warning signal to alert the law enforcement agencies of our country for them to be ahead of the curve. Quite clearly, we are where we are today because they were slow in getting off the starting blocks. By the time their presence was felt, by the time they demonstrated some visibility, a lot of damage had been done, both in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng. And that is unacceptable.
In fact, there was a mild admission, if you like, from the Defense Minister, Newzroom. I actually just want to take us back to her speaking to Parliament. It was late yesterday, where she tried to explain that the strategy initially was just to safeguard key national points. I'll get your take on that after this. Let's just take a listen to what she had to say.
Just to say in parting that in a situation I know is very bad in KZN, and has been bad for the past 2 days. But Chairperson, right now we have no less than 1,000 members in KZN. However, in Durban, we have about 800 members. Chairperson, when the deployment started, the deployment focused on deployment to national key points. It was like guard duties in areas, for instance, if you look at Port Shepstone, in areas where you have your oil refineries, at the airports, etc., etc. That's what we thought we needed to do, which was a discussion which was held between the police and the army, Chairperson. However, you'll recall that very day, people started attacking the malls, something which we had not anticipated. Our soldiers were not at the malls, Chair, and I'm not defending them, but the agreement between ourselves and the police was that we will do guard duty in order to release the police to go and enforce the law and engage with people who are carrying out acts of criminality. That's the only reason why we were not at the malls.
Speaking to Parliament there late last night. Dr. Mufamadi, let me bring you back into the conversation. She admits we hadn't anticipated the attacks at the malls. Is that yet another failure?
Well, you will recall that when I was talking to the report of the panel into State Security Agency at the Zondo Commission, we spoke at some length about the difference between the notion of human security and state security. it is not just a philosophical difference, it has got material consequences. You see, the minister is saying that they prioritized deploying around national key points. Now, people do not live and work in the national key points. They live and work in the places that were left unprotected, vulnerable to the type of looting and vandalization that has taken place. I am therefore saying that there must be something that, there is clearly something that was missing by way of the equipment of foresight when people were thinking about allocating state resources for the protection of society. The distribution, the allocation was skewed more in favor of state security than human security.
That was an interesting insight. You speak about a lack of foresight. There are those who believe there's more to it than just that. In fact, Zizi was speaking of instigators within the state security agency itself. Several articles being written about how there's an increased politicization of the state security agency as well. All of this, we're told, in some respects, with the attempts of destabilizing the country to declare the leadership illegitimate. Again, given the work you've done, a probable reality or a bit more far-fetched?
Well, I think we are better off looking at what, as I say, what is happening before our very eyes than speculating, because we need to guard against, I think, diversionary sensationalism. If there is something more than what the naked eye can see, it will definitely come out in the wash as the authorities investigate the underlying causes and everything else. But let's talk about what we can see. Think back to the immediate aftermath of the changeover to the new dispensation in 1994. Priority attention was paid to the task of promoting collaboration between the community and the authorities in the fight against crime. We saw in no time an exponential growth of community police forums. There has been a diminution in that activity. And in a situation where you do not pay attention to this task of promoting cooperation between the community and the police in particular, then it means that you do not have sources of information, which information becomes handy when you are to plan your crime prevention operations. So it's important that we also demystify this notion of intelligence. There's no way in which you can have good quality intelligence unless you are embedded in the communities that you serve.
Sure. We have also heard that the State Security Agency itself is investigating former agents. The name Thulani Jomo has come up again in recent reports as the person who's among those who've instigated the unrest in this country. You've made recommendations about how to treat people who are involved in this kind of behavior. Are you disappointed that nothing has been done yet?
Well, look, I know that the president will be appearing before the Zondo Commission to talk about what it is that government is doing. So I am not in a position, having submitted the report of our panel, to supervise government to know exactly whether they have implemented the recommendations or not. That will come out when they account to the public through the medium of the Zondo Commission. But the important point that I'm trying to take you back to, Ayanda, is that look at what happened in the country now. we've got 9 provinces. 7 out of these 9 provinces stood up as a bulwark against the descent, the possible descent to anarchy. And they said, we are throwing a line in the sand. It's not going to happen in our areas of jurisdiction. That is why there is relative peace in the 7 provinces of our country. And we are beginning to see peace and normalcy returning to some of the areas in the embattled provinces like KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, if you look at small towns like Utrecht, Greytown, life is normal there. You look at parts of Gauteng, Mamelodi, where people stood up and said, this is not going to happen. Now, it's important also that we guard against this popular mood, which is positive, from morphing into a mindset which will seek to contract out of, the rule of law. When people begin to feel that the law is not protecting them, and then they decide to take the law into their own hands. But this does not seem to be the case anyway. People are still reaching out to the police, notwithstanding the deficiencies that I spoke about. Many of the arrests that have taken place so far of people who are looting were carried out by civilians, which means that the police have to reach out to these civilians who are law-abiding citizens and make sure that together with these civilians, they become a pillar of defense for our democratic dispensation. There is no democracy if the dispensation does not provide adequate levels of safety and security to our people.
That's definitely something worth keeping in mind. I can gauge from your, call it, relative optimism that the calls even for a state of emergency perhaps are premature, if not completely misplaced insofar as you're concerned. But sadly, I'm out of time. Thanks very much indeed for engaging us. A lot to think about from, I guess, what you're calling us to focus on a morning like this. Really appreciate your time. Dr. Sydney Mufamadi is the former Safety and Security Minister. Doc, appreciate your time once again.